There's some things that we're going to put back in immediately, right? So things like our foundational beliefs, who we are, what we're about. Things like direction, right? Let's talk about direction real fast. What is the language we want to use to discuss what we think our task is? I think you've probably heard me say it before, hopefully more than just once by this point. But we want to, that's not a very good background. The language that we're using to talk about our direction, our purpose, is that we want to love well and live differently together. Love well, live differently together. In some senses, this is mimicked after the question that Jesus answers when he says that you should love God with all your heart, strength, soul, and mind, and strength. And you should love your neighbor as yourself. In some senses, that's what we're talking about. We talk about loving well. We talk first about knowing well. If we don't know what love is, then it's hard for us to reciprocate that. So we have to understand God's love for us in order to be able to show that love to others. We don't just have to know what love is, but we have to love everyone, even the people we don't like. I think this is probably the most challenging of the three, though perhaps embodied love is more challenging even than that. Because love that is just a theory is not real love. Love has to be tangible. Love has to people to be able to see you loving them. They have to be able to receive and understand that love. So when we talk about loving well, we talk about loving people that are difficult to love at all times and all places. I was in the checkout line. I was buying flowers on Valentine's Day for my wife, and we were going to be late to our non-reservation. We had to beat all the other reservation people there so we could get a seat at the bar tables because someone procrastinated a little bit. Anyway, so I'm in the line trying to buy some flowers for Valentine's Day, and there's a woman in front of me that is not aged, but is more aged than me, and for whatever reason, not able to use the little swiping machine for your credit card. And it took, it's one of those moments when you could pull every hair in your head out, you know what I mean? And she's talking about, I think I pressed the wrong button, blah, 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 it was one of them. Then she did press the wrong button, and then she went back to it again. And she swiped it again. I was all to myself, I should just do it for her. Like, I should just reach over and be like, what's your debit card number? Don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. I can do this with my hands, it's no problem. And she looked back at me. By this point in time, I decided in my brain that I was going to sort of give a glance to the person behind the register that I could tell that she was getting frustrated too. I thought we could just share that frustration. And the woman turned around to me, and she said, I know you just love old people like me who can't make these things work. And I said, I love people like you no matter if you can make the things work or not. She was like, oh. These flowers are not for you, lady. But when we think about loving well, sometimes we think about loving people that we hate, praying for our enemies, right, as Jesus commanded us to do. But I think that love well really changes the way we interact with people everywhere. In the car, like in the checkout line, no matter where we are, if we love well, I think people can see it. She assumed that she had already torn me off. She assumed she had already frustrated me beyond belief. Which, to be honest with you, we were getting pretty close. Pretty close to that. But that's the response that people expect. But if we are followers of Jesus Christ and we love well, we don't do what others expect. We love in a different way. And that leads us to living differently. We love well and live differently. Living differently, by that we mean we want to live full. Live full is the language that we use to talk about discipleship, what our lives look like when we model them after Christ, growing into the full stature of Jesus Christ. We want to live sent, recognizing that we're sent to serve in all times and places. Jesus says, as the Father sent me, so I send you. I think if we can see ourselves as being sent as God's messengers of good news everywhere we are, I think it changes the way we live, it changes the way we look at situations, it changes the way we interact with the world. And then lastly, we want to live generously. We want to live simply so that we can give abundantly. This is what we mean when we say live differently. We want to love well and live differently, and we want to do that together. For those of you who missed last week, I can show you a drawing. I'm not going to do it right now, but we talked about we started to talk about the two foci that we hope to really do a good job of in the new faith community together. That being serving others, what we kind of call social justice, and then being together, learning together, living together, which we call discipleship. And we drew a line between the two. We call that our relational axis. We really want to make sure that all of this is done inside a relationship. It's not about just telling people what they're supposed to think or supposed to know. We want to invite them to be a part of our family that lives in this way. We will love well and live differently together. Okay, so we've got our direction. We've got our foundational beliefs, things like the Apostles' Creed and stuff like that. Maybe we should have some authenticity. I think that would be good. Jesus, that's going to be an important thing for us to have, I would think, as well. I think the biblical teaching is important. I think that God's Word is there for us for a reason and for a purpose. All the rest of these things, well, prayer. All the rest of these things don't have to go back in. You can have a church without having a youth group. You can have a church without having anything for your kids. You can have a church without a staff. You can have a church without a place. You can have a church with no music. Your favorite program doesn't have to be there. Men's and women's programs don't have to be there. And you don't have to have a bulletin. None of these things are required to have a church. Now, I'm not saying that our new faith community is not going to have these things. But when we put these things back in the suitcase, we have to put them in purposefully. So, if our hope is to help people love well and live differently together, then anything we do with the youth, anything we do with the kids, any music we choose, any programs we lead, any bulletins we draw up, any men's and women's programs, any staff that we hire, and any place that we choose to locate has to be based around that. Because in the end, this is the stuff that ought to be in our suitcase. Does that make sense? You with me? So, having said that, my hope is that you can begin to think about sort of what's in your suitcase. I mean, again, these are some examples. They're not a ton of examples, but they're enough, I think, to get you started. So, look at your suitcase and unpack it, and then ask yourself what really needs to be in here. What needs to go in? Because, I said this last week, I'm going to say it again, just because it was so impactful to me. The folks that came over to get the peak started, I've heard more than one of them articulate the same thought in different ways. They said we were all sitting at the same table, but we were all pointed in different directions. They were all sitting at the same table. They were all here. They all wanted to see the peak survive. The problem was that they all had their pet projects. They all had their choice in music. They all had their programs that they wanted. They wanted their bulletins to look a certain way. And they all just did those things separately. There was not a cohesive center that held them all together. They were sitting at the same table, but they were pointed in different directions. If we're going to be the type of church that I think we can be and that we ought to be, we're going to have to focus around the things that are most important to us. And when we talk about that, this is what we talk about. Loving well, living differently together. And here's the thing, Edward, that is that I think if we really can do this, what we're actually not doing is starting a church. What we're actually doing is starting a movement. We're starting a way of life, a compelling understanding of what it looks like for us to live a Christian life that really, it changes the communities that we live in. It changes the schools we go to. It changes our neighborhoods. It changes our neighbors. It changes the people around us because they see us loving well and living differently, and it's so compelling to them that they want to be a part of it. I was talking with one of your children, and I just said, you know how some people are your friends, they're easy to love? Yes. And you know how some people are hard to love, they're a little bit annoying? Yes. Okay, well what happens if you just started loving them anyway? Would that change? Would that change your classroom? Would it change how your classroom felt? Would it change your school? And she said, yeah, this is great. Everybody should do this. Yay, do what I preach. That would be fantastic. But I think it's true. And I really think that people want to be a part of something that's life-changing. People want to be a part of a movement that seems to have energy and momentum. They don't want to just be a part of a group of people that get together every once in a while and make themselves feel better. So I don't intend or anticipate us doing that. Are there any questions about love well, live differently? Any questions about assumptions or things we've mentioned? Anything that's particularly worrisome to you or calls us weary? Yeah, 2 sermons in one day. How lucky do you feel? Good deal. All right.